The Northmen say the world will come to an end. The sun will grow black, the earth will sink into the sea, the stars will disappear, fire and water will meet, flames will play against the sky, the heavens and earth and all the world will be burned, all the gods will be dead, and the warriors of Valhalla and people everywhere. Senua, prepare yourself for Ragnarok, for it is nigh.
This video has been in the making since late August last year, but it took so much research and work that I didn't finish it until now. It didn't help that I suffered from severe writer's block halfway through creating the script. Oh joy, but I did it, finally. Welcome to Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, an in-depth symbolism and story analysis. When I read up on the story, I found many negative comments criticizing the quote-unquote boring gameplay, storytelling, as well as the main character herself. I'm going to be honest, the way it was marketed didn't do the game any favors. I myself thought it was just another mindless hack and slash game, but I was absolutely mind-blown by how beautifully the story of Senua was told. I won't touch the gameplay aspect of this game too much, but I am going to explain my take on the symbolism and theme of the story in depth. Obviously, there are massive spoilers ahead, so please proceed at your own risk. Senua's earliest memories are dipped in darkness and desperation. Her mental disorder was very possibly passed down to her by her mother Galina, as is often the case with mental illnesses. She was prone to insanity as a young girl, and it translated into full-on psychosis as she grew older. At a very young age, she watched her mother being emotionally and physically abused, by someone Senua trusted no less, which eventually led to Galina's decline into madness. Senua was systematically isolated and fed lies about her mother's and her own condition by her father Zynbel, who, later on being a priest, sacrificed Galina at a ritual pyre to cleanse her of her darkness, as they call it, when Senua was just 5 years old. She was told, supposedly by Zynbel, that Galina had killed herself, which was a lie as we found out later on through Senua's flashbacks. Senua's trauma brought her closer to the brink of insanity. Zynbel used this to further his own agenda by telling their clansmen that Senua is cursed by the darkness and continuously fueled their fear of her, which led to her being shunned by her people. Zynbel indoctrinated her in similar ways as he did with Galina, creating a sort of codependency where he'd spiral them into madness through demonization and isolation, while also seemingly being the only one who could provide a cure for their affliction. In her late teens, she met a young man named Dillian, who she quickly formed a close friendship to. She spotted him one day while he was training and studied him from afar for a while until curiosity eventually got the best of her and she decided to approach him. A kindred spirit, Dillian provided something that Senua has never felt the sensation of up until that point in her life: lightheartedness. Their friendship grew into a romance, and Senua soon decided that she felt strong and defiant enough to leave her home and start a life of her own, much to her father's dismay. Sometime after this, her village was struck by a terrible plague which took many tribe members as its victim. Amongst them was Dillian's father. Senua believed this to be her fault, and that the curse finally caught up to her, punishing her for defying her father and leaving her home. In her desperate state, she decides to leave Orkney altogether in an attempt to prevent further punishment and exiled herself. Senua returned to Orkney a while later, only to find her lover sacrificed in another ritual. Up until that point, she had somewhat of a grip on her mental affliction. Dillian gave her strength and hope, something she never thought she'd have, so she poured all of her love and happiness into their budding romance. And upon standing at the ritual site, witnessing Dillian's murder, she lost whatever hold she had left. All hell broke loose in her mind as she climbed onto the pyre, voices hissing at her, screaming that it's her fault, taunting her. She remembered the stories of ancient Celtic gods and heroic warriors fighting great evil, so she retrieved Dillian's head from the pyre, believing it's the seed of one's soul, wrapped it in cloth, and set out on a quest to redeem his spirit from the grip of the underworld. If you've watched the game dev documentary, you'll know that the creators of Hellblade made it a big deal to emphasize the Celtic symbolism throughout the game. If you haven't, I'd strongly advise you to catch up on it, as it will provide more insight into the story and it'll make it easier to understand where my arguments are coming from. Being somewhat familiar with the Norse alphabet, I couldn't help but notice the lack of some of the runes in the game. That, as well as the attention to detail about Celtic lore in general, gave me the impression that the runes chosen for Senua's trials are not mere coincidence. Senua's journey unravels by advancing through different chapters, each one of them addressing a certain theme or trauma. Once a stage has finished, Senua then steps through a runic gate to proceed to the next chapter. One thing that immediately jumped out to me after I made a list of gates and chapters in chronological order was the fact that the very first and the very last gate she steps through carry the same runic seal. The only other time it appears is during the chapters when Dillion becomes her guiding light. I will address the meaning of the rune in a second, but first I want to preface this by saying that this serves as a sort of reminder to Senua. She starts her journey with a specific purpose, but comes dangerously close to losing herself in the process several times. Whenever she does, whenever she's doubting herself, the rune appears to remind her of her ultimate goal, even if half of its meaning is still unclear to her until she reaches the final trial at the end of the game. Right as she first encounters Dru's spirit in Helheim, Senua is halted by a game that carries Manas as its seal, which is the rune that I was talking about earlier. Druth tells her,
"Focus your inner eye, and you too will see what's hidden in plain sight."
This is a very important message to Senua, especially at the start of her journey. Only right at the end, though, does she truly come to realize what that sentence really means. Every rune can be interpreted in a personal as well as a universal way. For example, Manas, the first seal, stands for humankind and its purpose. On a personal level, it symbolizes Senua's connection to her loved ones and how she carries them with her wherever she goes. In a way, she sets out to find justice and peace not only for Dillion or herself, but also for Druth and her mother, united in a common goal. However, Druth urges her to focus her inner eye to see the hidden truth. In spiritual terms, the inner, or the mind's eye, are often other used terms for the third eye. The third eye represents the threshold between the individual self, the part that makes us unique as humans, and the higher self, the part that ascends human limitations and calls for a higher purpose. Druth delivers this crucially important message to Senua for her to understand when she's finally ready to let go and see the bigger picture. Manas on a universal level represents awareness of union, that all humankind is essentially one, as well as representing the soul of one's core. Senua starts out by learning and understanding the subjective meaning of this, by manifesting her inner conflicts in form of physical trials when Manas first appears. It makes its last appearance at the last gate she has to pass through when she's finally ready to let go and accept the deeper metaphysical level of understanding of her core, thus allowing the wheel to come full circle. Oftentimes, the runic seals represent the challenges she will face when she steps through to accept the next trial, in addition to the hidden meaning of the bigger picture. That's especially the case during conquering Sword and Valravn. Valravn's seal is an alternation of the Celtic Triskelion, a symbol traditionally characterized by its 3 spirals extending out of its center. Valravn's seal manifests 3 raven heads radiating from the core. The Triskelion, which is also used in the title screen logo, generally represents a balance and fluidity between 3 central concepts. Think of it as a holy trinity. Oftentimes it's life, death, and rebirth. In Danish folklore, Valravn is a supernatural raven. A knight that has fallen in battle and hasn't been retrieved from the battlegrounds will be eaten by scavenging ravens. Those ravens gain human intelligence and understanding through consuming the knight's heart and turn into generally terrifying and grotesque beings dedicated to plague humans by tricking them and leading them astray, just to name a few of their malicious acts. If you combine the knowledge of what Valravn stands for with the Celtic Triskelion, the meaning gains a lot of significance. A balance act between life, death, and rebirth, which is the general theme of Senua's journey, obscured by trickery and illusion. Only when Senua sees through Valravn's patterns will she be able to continue her journey. As a player, we follow Senua on her journey thinking we're controlling her and her actions, taking her from place to place, through battle to battle, but something that didn't occur to me until I replayed the game is the thought that maybe we weren't controlling Senua herself at all. When I finished the game, I found myself googling for other people's experiences and opinions, and wasn't satisfied when I didn't find anything to explain my open questions about the story. I reflected over the game and its symbolism a lot, and eventually, upon rewatching some gameplay footage, realized that the majority of Senua's story is told through subtle nuances that you won't pick up on unless you specifically look for them. And that is why I came to the conclusion that, in the end, we weren't controlling Senua at all. You, me, the player, we are part of her world, part of the whispers in the wind. Right at the beginning, we are introduced to a soft voice as the view pans in on Senua paddling a boat across the water. The soft voice addresses us, the player, directly as part of the others, referring to the other voices whispering to Senua. She tells us,
"Hello. Who are you?" Doesn't matter. Welcome. You're safe with me. I'll be right here, nice and close so I can speak without alerting the others. Let me tell you about Senua. Her story has already come to an end, but now it begins anew.
Which led me to another theory I have about Senua herself possibly being dead and reliving her regrets and her guilt over and over in purgatory until she's able to break the cycle at the end. However, putting that theory aside, it is definitely insinuated that we, the player, aren't Senua herself, but rather just another voice. While the voices may vary in tone and intensity, they almost always say things to either protect Senua from harm or to help her understand so she can proceed on her journey. As someone who grew up traumatized from the very beginning, someone that has never learned how to process the impressions of everyday life, however simple they may be, these voices are a manifestation of Senua's inner guidance. While from a gameplay aspect the voices certainly exist to spook the player, from a narrative point of view they closely resemble voices of friends and family, as well as her own distorted thoughts. Senua has a love and hate relationship with them. Part of her realizes they are due to her illness and she spends a good amount of time wishing for them to go away and to leave her alone. But at the same time, the other part of her is unwilling to let them go because without them, she would be alone. It's important to keep in mind that this all takes place on a projected level of consciousness. What I mean with that is that Senua doesn't know how to deal with her internal struggles, so she subconsciously projects a powerful visual reality that uses symbolism and themes that she can understand and process. Keep in mind that this young woman grew up as a Viking warrior during a forgotten time when runes and demons, gods and magic had a very real place in the world through folklore and cultural traditions. This is her world, this is what she knows. Trying to create an alternate reality around yourself because life is too gruesome, trying to find reason amidst all the chaos to give life purpose because there has to be purpose for all the bad things that happen to you. There has to be a higher power, a fated destiny, because if not, then what is it all worth? What is there beyond tragedy and heartache? Emptiness. Void. This is Senua's struggle. From the minute she joined the earth, her life has been a tragic spiral into despair and madness. Chaos and darkness follows her wherever she goes. Everything good, however minute it may be, ripped away from her the second she lets herself believe. Because of this, in many ways Senua never actually grew up, at least on a mental level. She is still very much the child she used to be, helpless, scared, alone, trapped. The only way she knows how to cope with her tragedies is by creating a world in which she can actually fight tangible enemies and defeat the evil that has befallen her, because her reality is much more grim. There are no gods, there is no evil, no purpose. Nothing she can fight, no monster she can slay. No closure, no peace, just darkness. Before she opens the gate to Helheim after crossing the bridge, Senua has a vision of her first battle against the darkness that is clearly reminiscent of her last big battle against Hela herself. The first time, she fights numerous enemies until she's overcome by the darkness and eventually falls. The rot eats its way through her body until she becomes disfigured and rotten herself. Then we see another Senua appear behind the body on the floor, slowly approaching herself. The narrator voice who introduced us to the others in the beginning remarks that this is a vision of what's to come. And surely enough, at the end, when she surrenders and lays her weapons down to rest, lets go of her guilt, Senua falls and we see her standing over her own body as the image of Hela herself. The symbol of Hela, regent of the underworld, is the embodiment of what Senua fears to become. She spends her whole life being an outcast, shunned and feared because she has the same darkness within her that had previously befallen her mother as well. Her entire experience is tied to fear of herself and what her supposedly cursed self is capable of. Her struggle to accept herself and the tragedy in her life is so severe that she doesn't even recognize herself when she's looking in the mirror. She doesn't want to see it. Recognizing that she was Hela this whole time would mean to accept that she doesn't have and never had any control over the bad things that happened to her and her loved ones, and that there is nothing she can do to save those she lost. Part of her knows what her journey eventually will lead to, which is evident in the vision that she has upon first reaching the gate to Helheim, but she deliberately denies it. If she were to face the truth, she'd have to face herself, naked, beaten, and fallen, defeated. Hela embodies this beautifully. Hella's physical appearance is grotesque, scorched, half-rotten and branded, the latter being a particularly interesting fact. There are runes and markings etched all over her skin and body, which, in my opinion, represent the cruel rituals that Senua's father Zynbel made her go through to cleanse her of her illness. This is Senua's true self, unmasked and naked. The last battle is a showdown between Senua and her shadow, the final struggle to reconcile the self which fights to redeem itself, and the self that wants to lay down its weapons and finally rest. As long as Senua fights, as long as there are enemies to slay, there is purpose. But once she surrenders, she has to forgive herself for not being able to prevent the loss of her loved ones. Hella, her shadow, the self that wasn't strong enough to save those she held dear, who let her loved ones die and failed to redeem them, is the true enemy she was fighting all along. After facing Hella, she is finally able to accept her mother's and Dillian's death, and is able to forgive herself for the part that she played in it. She is ready to let go of the belief that their death had to have purpose, and releases her quest to reunite with herself, thus not only sacrificing Dillian's soul, but more importantly sacrificing who Senua was to become something new. One thing that I personally really liked about the ending is that the voices that accompanied Senua on her journey are still there in the end. It's a beautiful representation of mental illness and trauma, though the voices are a lot less distracting and cruel. They were surprised to still be alive and be there with Senua after the battle, since she gave up most of who she used to be, but she is able to accept them as part of herself and is ready to give them a home by fully acknowledging them. That in turn changes the whole tone. Whereas before they were loud, calling and crying out to her, sometimes being downright cruel, now they seem to peacefully coexist with Senua in harmonious symbiosis. Senua is standing strong, not fully accepting herself with all that she was, is, and will be. She seems to have reached a sort of nirvana. Clarity now guides her way, yet she knows that her story has only just begun. As I previously mentioned, another theory of mine is that Senua has been dead the entire time, and her journey represents her soul redeeming and experiencing itself to reach a higher understanding of what it really is. The final sequence of the ending really urged me to see beyond the veil of symbolism and review the game again from that angle. However, whether or not that's true, it doesn't really change the tone or the meaning of the story much, which is why I don't plan on making a separate video on that theory. Whether she's dead or alive doesn't change her motivation and the ultimate outcome, nor does it really impact the symbolism. It is, however, a fun little thing to keep in mind and adds another layer of depth to the story. I hope you found this video informative, and if you have any suggestions on how to improve these types of videos, please let me know in the comments below, as I do plan on making more story analysis videos in the future. Also, feel free to post your take on Senua's story and open a discussion about it. I'd love to hear your opinions on this. There were many other details I would have loved to get into, but if I explained every rune and every enemy, this video would be 5 hours long. That being said, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Catch you in the next one. Bye bye!